is everyone?
Good.
Good? The audience persevering. Second day, late in the afternoon. We'll try and make this interesting. First, I did have a question for you, Bill, before we do introductions. Rumor is that Nostradamus was born in New Jersey. Is that true?
Nostradamus was born December 14th, 1503. Jersey wasn't there yet. But yes, he was born in New Jersey.
Got it.
Everything emanates from New Jersey.
Was he licensed in New Jersey?
No, he wasn't able to get licensed.
He was not licensed in New Jersey.
But
Anyway,
you denied him, George.
yes, I probably did. Because he's wrong so often. You know, why
That's true.
why give him a license?
That's true.
Thankfully.
Anyway, thank you
Thankfully,
everyone for
right.
being here. Again, it's late in the day. We'll try and make this interesting. Let me introduce the panel. Stefan or Stephen?
Stephen.
Okay.
But Steve.
Okay,
It's
Steve.
easier.
Steve Krombolz is the Senior Vice President of Development and Strategy with Tipico North America. Harvard, not Harvard.
Not Harvard.
Harvard.
Harvard. Close.
Len,
Yes.
co-founder Nordic Affiliates,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
And I assume it's an affiliate company based in...
It's an affiliate company based in, well, we are originated from Nordics, obviously. But we are focusing more and more on US market with our flagship onlinegamblers.com.
Okay. And everyone knows William Pascrell III. Good to see you again, Bill.
Good to see you, George. Thank
Getting to
you.
be a habit. So I guess let's get started. We don't have a ton of time here. So, of course, the most important thing when we talk about a scenario that could possibly endanger the U.S. market has been talked about ad nauseum, but we had to cover it here again. And so, Bill, let's talk about responsible gaming. How is the industry going to convince politicians and regulators that they're able to balance their commercial interests while also doing the right thing when it comes to responsible gaming?
We've talked, as George has said, thank you, George, for having me, ad nauseum about RG, but I really don't think we could talk enough about it. George's former colleague, David Reebok, and I had a conversation a year ago about a company that was moving their key license in New Jersey. And I told the client that it was not likely that they were going to get their RG lead manager to become the key. And of course, they said, well, could you please ask the regulator? Now, this is important because I think it's different and unique in America than it is throughout the globe elsewhere. So I'm not sure anybody would care elsewhere, right or wrong or indifferent. And Director Reebok said to me, Bill, you know the answer. It's a no. The key license is somebody who is responsible for the entire commercial operation of an entity in a particular jurisdiction, like New Jersey. We know that the RG leads, who are earnest people that are not only battling regulators, competitors, and trying to sort things, but they're also battling internally with the commercials. And George really raises a great question because the chief revenue officer and the RG lead are always at war. But the CEO needs to sort that, to prioritize. Like we talk about in diversity and equity and inclusion, if you don't have a CEO, I don't care what stripe they are or what gender or religion they are, you set the tone. I think that the American gaming industry, particularly online, has to use, George, you will remember this, these guys are younger than us, and most of the room is far younger than me. Remember the old Etch-a-Sketch from France, came over to the US, Heil Company started it, where you had a draw with the two knobs?
Nostradamus had one of those, yes.
That's right.
Okay.
You turned it upside down and you shook it and you reset. We need to do a reset, I think, in the industry, and pivot from past behavior, which has not always gone well, to a more responsible way of conducting our business. So we create a sustainable industry.
Yep. Do you want to add anything to that, Steve, on RG?
Well, I think probably the responses across the board on some of the stuff we just discussed earlier are going to start with RG. So, I'll just jump ahead. When you talk about things from an operator perspective that could affect your business moving forward, they again start with RG, and it can start with advertising is the number one pain point, right? Because you hear that from everybody, especially new states, the newest being Ohio, right? And Ohio OCCC has taken a very hands-on approach to controlling, number one, the messaging. They can't do so much to control the volume, although I think they'd like to. So you have to be very careful because too many ads with the wrong message are going to fuel the underlying problem, which everybody ultimately is concerned about, is the responsible gaming. Because if that starts to get out of control and then you start to have a lot of repercussions around that and increased incidences of compulsive gambling and increased calls into the 800 number hotlines, then there's going to be proactively, the regulators are going to take a position where they're going to force you to do certain things, which of course no one wants, right? We want to be able to control our own destiny there, and it could be anything from increased tax rate, which the governor in Ohio has already thrown out there. I think sort of a shot across the bow.
Yeah,
so
can
to
you
speak.
just for the audience, everyone may not know about that because it's kind of unprecedented.
Yeah.
Just get a little granular on that, how that happened, because it's an outlier for sure.
Absolutely. So in Ohio, there were a number of incidences out of the box where the commission fined operators for various things, advertising on a college campus, using the term free bets, which is especially challenging to adhere to for a large national operator, right? Because they have ads on NFL games that are nationwide. And now all of a sudden in Ohio, they can't say free. So those percolated very quickly and resulted in fines even before the market opened. So I think
Imagine that. Right?
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting, right?
Substantial fines, up to 200,000, I think.
That's right, yeah.
250. So obviously then gets on the radar of the governor. So I think, he came out in his budget and said there was some talk to raise the tax rate from 10 to 20%. And there was also discussion about maybe it would just be implemented for those that, as a punishment for those that violate.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah. So it probably won't happen the first time, but it's absolutely an indication of, hey, reel this in or we're going to reel it in for you. Yep. So again, Ohio has been very different than other markets. And the OCCC, the regulatory body, is an open door. And we've had a lot of ongoing and candid discussions with them, and we're thinking about doing certain things where we're not sure we can. So yeah, that's okay. Sort of an example.
And before we leave this topic, anything from a Nordic perspective on this? Because obviously Europe is a little crazy on some of this stuff.
It is for
in
sure.
their remedies.
Yeah, it is for sure. I mean, believe it or not, but I mean, the players that actually visit our sites, they believe what we write somehow. And that's a good thing, and it could be a bad thing, right? Because it leaves us with a huge responsibility to also advocate for responsible gaming. And yeah, if we don't do our job, then it will be difficult for the operator as well to do their job.
Yeah, and as you know, in Ohio, there's no regulations for affiliates, so
right.
We're ultimately responsible for the affiliates.
Exactly.
So you have to, and affiliates, they do not want to violate the rules because it's not good for their business. So
Definitely.
It's really a communication, right? We have to have open communication with your affiliates to ensure that they're advertising properly, because you're not the one that's going to get fined, we are. So.
Yeah.
So, go on.
Yeah, no, that's totally 100% correct. I mean, the communication flow between the operators and the affiliates are, at this moment, compared to the European market, almost non-existent. And I think that's it's going to solve a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So let's stay on the affiliate issue. And obviously, in some of the earlier panels, we talked about how important they are to the gaming ecosystem, despite what Massachusetts thinks. Or may think.
Right.
What role should affiliates play in dealing and assisting in responsible gaming? And do they have a major role?
Yes, definitely. I mean, in some of the cases, we might be the first feeling that the player will get of the brand. because it will usually, in our case, we do mainly pull marketing, which is quite different to push marketing. People come to our sites from search engines on different terms, but we are responsible to market the brand in a way that they are happy with, of course, and it's also in our best interest to keep the market as sustainable as possible.
Bill, you deal with some affiliates. Do you have anything additional to add to that responsibility of affiliates in RG?
George, I remember several years ago in a state in the Midwest where I spoke to the governor of the state, who put me in touch with the regulator, who at that time I had not really known. And I asked the regulator, they were onboarding and launching, what are you going to do with affiliates? And the regulator said to me, what's an affiliate? I think what Massachusetts is doing, although well-intentioned, is absurd. And I think it's counterproductive to what everybody, and I really respect your company, and what you've accomplished is quite incredible. The best is yet to come, right?
Yeah.
But the affiliates provide so much power, as George talked about on an earlier panel, because the regulators are cracking down on affiliates who are operating in black markets. You can use the affiliate to leverage a better regulatory regime, better responsible gaming, better consumer protection, and helping Steve, who's working vigorously to create a more sustainable industry. So, you know, the tax issue in Ohio, I don't think will stand constitutional muster. You can't tax equivalent operators because somebody does something sideways. Well, you fine them, you penalize them, you slap them, or what have you. But we have such absurdity going on, for example, in Ohio, where you have a major operator with, Steve put it as a $250,000 fine. We know who I'm talking about, and I'm not mentioning the name, but it's really a slap on the wrist because it was for underage gambling. Then you have another operator, who everybody in the room probably knows this story, who is now going to be blocked from getting a license because they had a game that they got a legal opinion on that said was legal, and it turned out it wasn't. That's not proper. You never see that happen in a jurisdiction that George regulated. Never see that happen. But I think this is where the US market is maturing. We're still 9.5 years in iGaming and approaching our 5th anniversary in sports betting and online sports betting. But we have a responsibility to work harder in the industry to highlight these points. And I think thanks to iGaming Next, we're able to do that on a recurring basis.
So, yeah, so RG, again, center stage again on all these conversations, and rightly so. And again, I think it'll certainly be the theme through 2023, 2024. Clearly, if not tamed and done properly, will be a threat to the industry. And again, everyone sees it. I think the message is out to operators. It's certainly out to regulators. But there are other threats, right, Steve? So, for example, there's other overreaches, arguably, in Europe regarding determining whether or not an individual player should be wagering a certain amount. Can you tell us about that a little bit? And that is truly scary from a U.S. perspective.
It is, and I can give you firsthand accounts of how it's difficult because...
What, they limited your betting?
No, not me. No. But for those of you that may not know, Tipico is a large international betting operator, B2C market leader in Germany, and when you hear a lot about UK white papers and how that's going to affect the market there, but there's already regulations that have been put in place in Germany that are quite restrictive. And just to touch on it, because I think it's interesting and it's a forward look for the US, that this is, you don't want to get to the point where this is how they regulate it, but they have a centralized system that they use to monitor customer play, capped at $1,000 in stakes a month. So every operator has to ping a centralized database run by the government on every deposit to make sure that you haven't exceeded your monthly threshold, and that's aggregate across all operators. They limited stakes. The casino there is only slots today. Limited stake slot stakes to $1. They limit concurrent play, so you can't play on one site and the other at the same time. You have to have a 5-minute cool-off period between. And again, this is pinged against a government centralized database. So you're now responsible on integrating with this government system. You're responsible on it being timely with its response, and most importantly, we're relying on it to be up and active. And for a company like ours, over there, we're very strong, 55% market share, and we can do these things, and we can accommodate that, and it'll probably strengthen our position over time. But for those that are not so as well established, it's going to make it more difficult. So when you look at the U.S., that's sort of a look into the future that if you don't do things the right way and you generate a lot of negative publicity, and more important, that's based on real problems, then you're going to have those issues forced on you. So I think we all want to avoid that.
So it's going to reduce competition also. Yeah,
It will most likely make the strongest players stronger.
Got it.
And grab more market share because it's more impactful for a smaller operator who doesn't have the scale.
So, Bill, from a cultural standpoint, knowing how the U.S. is, I mean, could that ever fly here where an operator could say to a particular person, we're not going to let you wager more than $500 a month because we kind of have an idea how much you make, and we are going to decide that that's your limit for that particular month? I mean, is that even remotely possible in the United States?
I think it's hard to convince operators to do that, but I also think, and we talked about this earlier offline, George, there are a number of companies, for example, like Entain with their ARC technology, that are putting 86 data points in to measure player behavior, income levels, limits. It's very hard to do that across the board, but I suggest that the operators need to be sensitive about perception, which in politics becomes reality, of preying on the poor. Like the brick and mortar industry has done for so many years, treating the gambling addicted customer as their VIP customer. I think online is sophisticated enough, and I hope future thinking enough to realize that behavior cannot last anymore. And I said it earlier, George, if you'll permit me, but you can't just throw a 1-800 number on your consumer-facing page, check the box and feel you've done your obligation. It's a recurring, revisiting debate, internal, external, and understanding that by protecting the consumer, protecting the punter, the player, you're creating a sustainable industry. That player may go somewhere else. But the fact that I can self-exclude today in New York, and then just go across where I go tonight to go home, go across the bridge or tunnel, and play there is absurd. I mean, it just shouldn't happen. And I know that there's a lot of operators that don't want it to happen nationally, but I think it's in the industry's interest to explore that. Sidebar on data protection and all the reasons why not to do something. And final point, Congressman Taka, who I'll be in his office in 2 weeks, I'm very concerned about that bill, George, we discussed it earlier. Despite the fact that he's a Democrat and is probably not going to go anywhere, it's already enticing other legislators to talk about ad bans, which is not the American way. I think there's all kinds of constitutional issues involved in that, and it's not going to solve any RG problem, and it's not going to solve the black market issue.
Yeah, and just a follow-up on that, it's really difficult to thread the needle on addressing affordability and being overly restrictive and then just driving people into the black market. So if you look at it, if you're going to severely limit, in the case of Germany, someone's ability to wager, then there's a good chance you're going to drive a percentage of those customers to play black market games.
That's right.
Where there's probably
There's a
no
balance,
RG
you're right.
protection.
Yeah,
There's zero,
Right.
and they're definitely more aggressive there in blocking the black market, but people find a way, right? So
Yeah, that's right.
So you touched on probably the third Nostradamus issue, which is the illegal offshore market threatening the industry. Do affiliates play a role in trying to drive customers or get customers out of the black market to regulated sites in the U.S.?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, what they're doing in Germany at the moment is basically the recipe to create the black market. And whenever there is someone who wants to gamble, they will be able to gamble, and affiliates, they will be there to cater for them to gamble. So 100%, we have a huge responsibility when it comes to promoting safe gambling, legal gambling, and licensed gambling. That's also hand in hand with betting responsibly.
Okay. We're running out of time. One other minor issue I want to talk about is this whole ban on home college sports teams. And a lot of states, including my state, New Jersey, do not allow wagers. I mean, Bill, is that, listen, I'm not suggesting that's a threat to the market, but like, what is the underlying premise of that, and does the premise hold? Is it really doing anything?
Havard, I want to answer that question, but I want to thank you for keeping your comments so short. You did an amazing job.
Thank you.
I won the bet.
You did.
George, as you know, when we passed, post the repeal of PASPA, May 14th of 2018, and we accelerated the launch of first retail and then online sports betting, and I talked to the Senate President and the governor and thought it was a fool's errand. They banned betting on in-state colleges. Massachusetts did the same thing, but they all said, the Senate President, the governor, don't worry, we'll revisit this down the road. And they did. They had a ballot referendum in 2020. And you know what it got? 27% of the vote. The voters didn't even know what they were voting on. It is so ridiculous to ban. Can you imagine not being able to bet on Rutgers or Seton Hall, New Jersey, or Boston College, or name another great institution in Massachusetts with a rich betting culture? It's so silly. And all you're doing is two things. You're driving people to border states or to the black market. And this is not the fault of legislators or regulators. It's our responsibility to educate before we advocate.
We have to finish. Unfortunately, we have a shortened session today. Anything to add on, how does Tipico feel about the ban on home teams, I assume?
I mean, I think it's ridiculous.
Right.
But we don't have much say. You know,
No.
whatever we're told, we'll adhere to.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
I understand that. Having sat in a number of the legislative sessions, you quickly learn that people don't understand
Right.
what they're betting on, and it's actually pretty inflammatory when you see the people that are talking to them to sell these things. Egregious in some cases. So I don't think it's warranted, but of course we'll follow the rules.
Of course, good answer, very politically correct. So anyway, we have to cut this short. Thank you, Steve, Havard, William. Give them a hand of applause, please, everybody. Great job.